Just after midnight, the lights inside Parchman suddenly went out. No warning, no guards, only silence in a place where silence is dangerous. Some inmates whispered that the power failure was no accident. Others said it was a message that something inside Unit 29 was about to break loose. In that darkness, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever was happening inside Parchman Farm that night was never meant to be seen by the outside world. But today, we are opening that door. To understand what happened on that dark night, we have to go back to where this story truly begins. Parchman was never built to be a normal prison. It wasn't built to rehabilitate people. It was built to control them. In 1901, deep in the Mississippi Delta, the state opened a massive prison farm. 20,000 acres of open land, cotton fields, and wooden barracks. A place where prisoners, mostly black men, were forced to live and work for the state. People called it the farm, but to the men inside, it felt like a world designed to break you down. Every field, every rule, every structure served one purpose: to remind you that escape, physical or emotional, was almost impossible. In those early years, hundreds of men slept in long wooden barracks. No privacy, no protection, and almost no voice to tell the world what they were going through. For decades, what happened inside Parchman stayed inside Parchman. The state rarely talked about it. Reporters were almost never allowed in. Families only heard bits and pieces through letters and whispered stories. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Over time, conditions kept getting worse. Overcrowding, lack of medical care, dangerous living areas, all of it piled on top of decades of silence. By the 1970s, the outside world finally learned enough to take action. A lawsuit revealed long-ignored problems: poor sanitation, unsafe housing, racial discrimination, and a system that punished inmates far beyond their sentences. Changes were ordered. Reforms finally began. The world thought Parchman was starting a new chapter. But inside those long rows of cell blocks, things were not improving fast enough. Some problems never fully left. Others came back even stronger. Old buildings continued to decay. Some units had leaking roofs, broken plumbing, or no working lights. Tensions inside grew year after year. And all of it slowly built toward one moment: the night the lights went out. That night, everything that had been ignored for years rose to the surface at once. And nothing could stop what was coming. When the lights went out inside Parchman, every inmate in Unit 29 felt the same thing: fear. Not loud fear, not screaming fear. A quiet, heavy fear that sinks into your chest and doesn't let go. The power had been failing for weeks. Some days the lights flickered. Some days the water stopped running. Sometimes hours passed with no guards walking the halls. But this time was different. This blackout lasted longer, and the silence felt wrong. In the darkness, men whispered through the bars. Some said the generator had blown. Others said the staff walked out because conditions were getting too dangerous. But one rumor spread faster than the rest: Unit 29 is on its own tonight. For many inmates, that wasn't a surprise. They had been reporting problems for months: overflowing toilets, broken locks, cells so dark that men had to feel around just to find their own beds. Some had begged for transfers for safety. Others filed complaints that disappeared into the system with no response. And now, on this pitch-black night, everything they feared was becoming real. In the distance, a single voice shouted for help. Then another. Then another. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone knew why it was happening. Unit 29 had been called one of the most dangerous parts of the prison. Overcrowded, understaffed, a place where tension grew like heat in a sealed room. The lights were gone. The locks weren't working properly, and there was no sign of a guard. Minutes felt like hours. Some inmates pressed themselves against the wall, hoping the night would pass. Others moved nervously inside their cells, not sure what was coming next. A few men began shouting for officers, begging for help, warning that things were getting out of control. But the silence from outside the unit said everything. This was no longer just a bad night. This was the breaking point that years of neglect had created. And as the darkness thickened, something happened that would put Parchman in national headlines. Someone opened a cell door. No one knew how. No one knew who. Maybe the lock failed. Maybe someone forced it. Maybe it was already broken from years of wear. But once that first door opened, the entire unit felt the shift. Voices grew louder. Footsteps echoed. Tension rose like a storm cloud building in seconds. For the first time, inmates realized the horrifying truth. Tonight, Parchman wasn't being run by guards. Tonight, Parchman was running itself. And what happened next would change Parchman's history forever. The moment that first cell door swung open, Unit 29 changed. It didn't explode into chaos. It didn't erupt into loud destruction. It shifted quietly, like a building that starts to lean long before it collapses. In the darkness, nobody could tell who was moving or where they were going. All they knew was that footsteps were no longer coming from just one place. They were coming from everywhere. Some inmates called out for guards again, hoping someone would show up. But no one answered. No radios. No keys. No voices. It felt like the entire unit had been cut off from the outside world. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The tension kept rising until it felt like the walls were vibrating. Inside the cells, men were trying to guess what would happen next. Some prayed quietly. Some stayed low on their bunks, waiting. Others talked through the darkness, trying to calm each other down. But every few minutes, another sound echoed through the unit. A door creaking, a metal latch clicking, a distant yell. And with each sound, more inmates realized something was going terribly wrong. Multiple doors were unlocking. Whether the locks failed, whether someone tampered with them, or whether neglect had simply caught up with the unit, no one knew. But one thing was certain. Parchman was no longer in control of Parchman. In the early hours of the morning, a faint glow appeared down the hallway, the kind of dim light that slips in under a door. A small group of inmates gathered near the bars, trying to see. The glow got brighter, as if someone had opened an outside door or turned on a phone flashlight. And then they saw it. A section of the hallway floor was flooded with water. Not from rain, not from a leak. From pipes that had burst beneath the unit days earlier. Pipes that had never been repaired. The water had been rising slowly, unnoticed in the dark. By the time the faint light hit it, the whole bottom of the hallway shimmered like a long black mirror. That's when panic truly set in. Broken locks. No guards. Total darkness. And rising water. This wasn't just a dangerous night. It was a failure from the inside out. A disaster built over years, now happening all at once. Men began shouting to each other across the unit, calling out warnings. Some tried to move toward higher ground inside their cells. Others feared the water could reach electrical wires or spread into occupied areas. And all of it, the water, the darkness, the broken doors, led to a moment no one expected. A loud noise thundered through the unit. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a guard. It was the heavy entrance door slamming shut from the outside. Someone had sealed Unit 29. And now, the inmates inside weren't just trapped in darkness. They were isolated. No guards in. No inmates out. No communication. No help. A whole unit of men left alone in one of the most notorious prisons in America. At the very moment, everything inside was falling apart. What happened next would shock the entire country and finally force the world to look inside Parchman Farm. When that entrance door slammed shut from the outside, the entire unit went silent. Not because things were calm, but because every man inside Unit 29 finally understood what the slam meant. They were on their own. The darkness felt heavier. The floor water kept rising. And the broken locks made it impossible to know what might happen next. Hours passed with no sign of help. Some inmates tried shouting through the cracks around the main door. Others banged on the bars, hoping a guard on the outside might hear. But nothing changed. The world outside Parchman had no idea what was happening inside that unit. The prison phones weren't working. Staff communication was limited. And the building itself was falling apart faster than anyone expected. But inside the darkness, there was one small spark of hope, a cell phone. In Parchman, phones weren't allowed, but over the years many inmates had managed to get them. Most used them to call their families or send messages they were too afraid to speak out loud. On this night, that hidden phone became the only lifeline to the outside world. A group of inmates huddled together, using the faint glow of the screen to see each other's faces for the first time in hours. They spoke quietly, trying not to start a panic, trying not to draw the wrong kind of attention. One man managed to send a message to his family. Unit 29, no power. Water rising. No guards. We need help. Nobody knew if the message would get through. Nobody knew if anyone would care. But miles away, in a small Mississippi home, a mother read that message and instantly felt her heart drop. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and started calling everyone she could. The prison, the local sheriff, reporters, anyone who would listen. Most people told her they couldn't do anything. Some didn't answer at all. But one call changed everything. A local reporter responded. A reporter who had been looking into Parchman for months. A reporter who had heard rumors but never had proof. Now they had a message, a time, a place, and a reason to pay attention. Within hours, the story started to spread across social media. Families of other inmates began sharing their own warnings, their own fears, their own unanswered questions. And suddenly, for the first time in years, the outside world finally began to look toward Parchman Farm. But inside Unit 29, nothing had changed yet. The lights were still out. The water was still rising. The doors were still unlocked. And the men were still trapped behind that heavy, sealed entrance. They had no idea that the world had started watching. No idea that their messages were spreading. No idea that reporters were gathering information and state officials were being pressured to respond. All they knew was that the night wasn't over, and something inside the unit was starting to move. A sound echoed through the hallway, slow footsteps. Not running, not stumbling, just steady footsteps in the dark. Every man inside froze. Someone, or something, was coming down the hallway. But who? A guard? An inmate? A state official? Or something far more unpredictable? The next moment would decide what the outside world would discover about Parchman and what the men trapped inside would have to survive. The footsteps grew louder, slow, steady, echoing through the water-covered hallway. No one inside Unit 29 moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that happens when every person in a room holds their breath at the same time. Some inmates leaned close to their bars, trying to see through the darkness. Others backed into the corners of their cells, afraid of who, or what, was coming. The footsteps kept approaching. Step, step, step. Finally, a faint silhouette appeared in the hallway. A single figure, moving carefully through the water, holding what looked like a dim light. Not bright enough to reveal a face, but just bright enough to show that whoever it was, they weren't wearing a guard's uniform. That realization sent a wave of tension through the whole unit. If it wasn't a guard, then who was it? The figure stopped beside the first row of cells, but said nothing. Minutes passed like hours. Then, in a low voice, the figure whispered, "They sealed the door. Nobody's coming in." The words hit the unit like a cold wind. The inmates closest to the hallway tried asking questions. Who are you? What's going on? Where are the officers? But the figure didn't answer those questions. Instead, they stepped closer to the bars and said something nobody expected. People outside know. Your messages got out. For a moment, the men inside didn't believe it. They had seen too many warnings ignored, too many complaints dismissed, too many promises broken. But the figure continued. The news is spreading. Families are calling. The state is being pressured. They can't hide this anymore. A small flicker of hope moved through the darkness, a feeling many inside Unit 29 hadn't felt in years. But the figure wasn't finished. There's a team coming, they said. Investigators. Reporters. They want access to the unit. But until someone opens that door, you're still on your own. Hope sank back into fear. Because even if the outside world finally cared, that didn't change the fact that inside this unit, the water was still rising, the power was still out, and the locks were still failing. Before anyone could ask another question, a loud bang echoed from the far end of the hallway. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of something metallic hitting the floor. The figure instantly backed away into the shadows. The inmates froze again. Another bang echoed. Then a third, heavier, closer, shaking the wall. It sounded like someone, or maybe several people, was trying to open something, or break something. Whatever it was coming from the direction of the sealed entrance. The silence didn't last. A deep scraping noise began, slow, dragging, metal against metal. The kind of sound you hear when a lock is being forced from the other side. Every man in Unit 29 knew what that meant. Someone was trying to get in, or trying to get out. But no one knew who. And no one knew why. All they knew was this. Whatever was behind that door was powerful enough to shake the entire unit. And the moment it broke through, everything inside Parchman Farm was going to change. The scraping sound grew louder, slow, heavy, grinding along the metal frame of the only exit. Everyone inside Unit 29 stared toward the dark hallway, waiting for the next sound. Waiting for something. Anything. That would tell them what was happening. Then, the noise stopped. A thick silence followed. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. Suddenly, boom. A loud hit slammed against the sealed door, shaking the wall so hard dust drifted from the ceiling. Another boom. This time even stronger. The inmates looked at each other, fear crawling across their faces. Some thought it was officers trying to force their way in. Some thought it was angry inmates trapped on the other side. Others feared it was something even worse, someone using the blackout to settle old scores. The mysterious figure who had delivered the message earlier? Gone. Vanished into the shadows without a sound. All that remained was the echo of metal bending under pressure. Then came the voice. Muffled. Deep. On the other side of the door. Back away from the entrance. The inmates froze. It didn't sound like a guard. It didn't sound like an inmate either. The voice wasn't panicked. It was calm. Too calm. Another hit slammed into the door, but this time, the top hinge snapped, and the entire frame twisted. The hallway lights flickered for half a second. Just enough to show it. The steel door, a door meant to withstand riots and lockdowns, was starting to buckle. Inside the unit, some inmates backed away from their bars, bracing for the worst. Others pressed closer, desperate to see who, or what, was about to enter. A long, deep groan rolled through the metal as the door leaned inward. Then, a narrow crack opened, just an inch at first, but enough for cold air to rush inside, carrying a smell that made everyone stop. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't chemicals. It wasn't anything dangerous. It was outside air. Fresh. Cool. Impossible to ignore after weeks of stifling heat and failing ventilation. But that moment of relief didn't last. Because through that narrow crack, everyone saw something they didn't expect. A gloved hand reaching through the opening, not pulling the door open, but trying to push something inside. A small object, rectangular, wrapped in black plastic. One of the inmates whispered, "Is that a camera?" Nobody answered, because the hand suddenly froze, and a loud shout echoed from somewhere off in the distance. "Hey, step away from that door." It was a guard, a real one this time, running toward the entrance from the outer hallway. Heavy boots splashed through water as more officers charged down the corridor. But the gloved hand didn't pull back. Instead, it shoved the object through the opening, let it fall to the wet floor inside Unit 29, and then disappeared. The steel door snapped shut from the outside before the officers arrived, sealing the unit once again. The guards reached the entrance seconds later, yanking on the door, banging on it, shouting for someone to respond. But whoever had forced it open, whoever had pushed that object inside, was already gone. Inside the unit, the inmates stared at the rectangular object lying in the water. No one moved. No one touched it. Because everyone knew, whatever was in that package wasn't meant to be there. And whatever it contained was going to change everything. The camera slowly zooms in, water dripping, electricity humming faintly in the background, as the object sits on the floor of one of America's most infamous prisons, waiting to be opened. The package sat in the middle of the flooded floor. Rectangular, wrapped in black plastic, heavy enough to feel important, but light enough to be moved. No one inside Unit 29 touched it. Not yet. The inmates circled it cautiously, whispering to each other in low tones. "What is it?" one asked. "Why would someone leave it here?" another replied. Some thought it might be evidence. Some thought it was a trap. Others believed it could be a lifeline, a way to finally reach the outside world. Finally, one of the braver inmates stepped forward. Carefully, he nudged the package with his foot. It shifted slightly, revealing a small label, "For your eyes only." A hush fell over the entire unit. No one had ever seen a message like this inside Parchman. No one had ever received a gift, a warning, or a secret from outside in decades. The inmate bent down and carefully picked up the package. Inside, wrapped neatly in layers of paper, were several items. A small notebook with pages filled in careful handwriting. A USB drive. A note, written in bold letters. "The world is watching. Do not destroy this. Record everything." The notebook contained names, dates, and locations. It detailed months of conditions inside the unit, problems ignored, and warnings the state had failed to act on. Every entry matched what the inmates had been trying to report for years. The USB drive contained video clips, footage of leaks, broken locks, overcrowded cells, and failed systems. Footage that could finally prove what life was really like inside Parchman Farm. The inmates realized something immediately. This wasn't just a package. This was a chance to be heard, a chance to expose decades of neglect. But there was a catch. To use it, they had to survive the night. The water was still rising. The lights were still out. And some doors in the unit were still unsecured. The object had given them hope, but hope inside Parchman was dangerous. Because everyone knew, if the wrong people found out what they had, it could make things far worse. The night stretched on. The group huddled in one corner, passing the notebook and USB around, planning. Each man whispered strategies, deciding how to use the evidence to finally bring the outside world into their darkness. And outside the unit, reporters had started asking questions. Calls were being made. Authorities were scrambling. But inside Unit 29, the inmates had no idea how long it would take for anyone to get in, or whether anyone would get in at all. The package was their lifeline, but it was also a countdown. Every minute they waited, the unit became more dangerous. Every shadow could hide something, or someone, and every second brought them closer to a breaking point. No one knew how the night would end, or whether anyone would survive long enough to tell the story. The inmates gathered in the corner of Unit 29, huddled around the notebook and USB drive. The water lapped at their boots, and the air smelled damp and musty. "This is our chance," one whispered. "No one outside knows exactly what's happening here yet. If we use this, the world will finally see." Another man frowned. "But how? The doors are sealed, the lights are out, and the guards aren't coming in. If we try to move this, we could get caught, or worse." The first man shook his head. "We have to take the risk. This isn't just about us. This is about everyone who's been trapped here, forgotten for years. If we fail, maybe nothing changes. If we succeed, maybe Parchman finally gets held accountable." For the first time in hours, a sense of purpose spread through the unit. Fear remained, but it was mixed with determination. These men weren't just surviving the night. They were planning to make history. Step by step, they devised a plan. First, they would secure the package somewhere safe, where the water couldn't damage it. Second, they would record everything: the conditions, the flooded hallways, the broken doors, the overcrowding. Third, they would find a way to get the evidence outside, even if it meant slipping it past guards, reporters, or anyone who might try to stop them. They divided tasks. Some stayed to guard the package. Others began documenting the unit with their own makeshift devices. Every sound in the hallway, the distant dripping, the faint creak of doors, the echoing boots outside, felt like a countdown. Hours passed. The outside world was slowly becoming aware that something was happening inside Unit 29, but they had no idea what. And then, something unexpected happened. A loud sound echoed down the hall. A series of knocks, deliberate and timed. The men froze. It didn't sound like a guard. It didn't sound like an inmate. It was something else. The leader whispered, "That's the signal." He didn't explain why. No one needed to know. They already understood. Someone, or something, was ready to make contact from the outside. The night that had started with darkness, fear, and isolation was about to take a new turn. Every man held his breath. Every eye stayed fixed on the hallway, because the next moment would decide whether the package would fulfill its purpose or remain just another secret trapped inside Parchman Farm. And no one inside Unit 29 knew which side of history they were about to be on. The knocks echoed again, this time louder and sharper. The men in Unit 29 stiffened. For hours, they had waited in silence, listening to the distant hum of the broken lights, the drip of water, the faint creaks of old doors. Now, there was a sign from the outside. A voice called softly through the crack of a partially open door. "Is anyone there? We know you're inside." The inmates froze. For a moment, they didn't move. Could they trust this voice? Was it a trick? A setup? A trap? Then the leader of the group stepped forward, holding the notebook. "We have proof," he whispered. "Proof of what's happening here. Evidence. Everything." The voice answered calmly, but urgently. "Good. Hold it tight. We're going to help you get it out. But you have to stay calm. Don't make sudden moves. Do exactly as we say." The men exchanged glances. For the first time that night, there was hope. Someone outside was listening. Someone outside cared. They followed instructions carefully. A second voice joined, giving precise directions. "Move the package to the corner near the back wall. Keep the notebook dry. Use the flashlights only if necessary. Stay low. Guards may come at any moment." The inmates worked together, slowly, carefully. Every movement counted. Every step had to be deliberate. One wrong move, and their chance would vanish. As they secured the notebook and USB, a faint vibration ran through the floor. Footsteps outside, they weren't guards. Someone was approaching the outer gate. The voices guided them again. When the gate opens, leave the package near the opening and retreat to your cells. We will retrieve it immediately. Do not touch it after that. The seconds felt like hours. The water was rising. The lights flickered weakly, revealing the walls, the ceiling, the rows of cramped cells. And then, finally, the sound of the outer gate unlocking. Metal grinding, chains rattling. The inmates held their breath. A pair of hands appeared through the narrow opening at the bottom of the gate. Slowly, carefully, they reached for the package. Every man in Unit 29 watched. Every man's heart raced. And for a brief moment, hope took over fear. The hands pulled the package through the opening. The notebook and USB drive were gone from their hands. The evidence was finally leaving Parchman Farm. A cheer rose quietly from the corner of the unit. But it was cautious, because even though the first step had succeeded, the night was far from over. The guards could arrive at any moment. The water could rise further. The lights could fail completely. And inside Parchman, the men knew one truth. Even though the outside world now had proof, they were still trapped in the dark. The night wasn't over, and Parchman's secrets still weren't fully revealed. The package was gone, pulled through the narrow gate, and for the first time in decades, the voices of Unit 29 were reaching the outside world. Within hours, reporters received the notebook and USB drive. The footage, the notes, the recorded evidence, it told a story nobody could ignore. Broken doors and locks overcrowded. Flooded hallways, decades of neglect and mismanagement, the fear and courage of inmates who had lived through it all. News outlets began broadcasting the story nationwide. Families shared their relief, their outrage, and their disbelief. Finally, the world was seeing Parchman as it truly was. Inside Unit 29, the men waited anxiously. The guards were alerted, but instead of punishing them, the state had no choice but to address the crisis. Investigators arrived, documenting conditions firsthand, while reporters captured every detail. For the first time, the voices of prisoners mattered. For the first time, the years of silence and neglect were exposed. And for the first time, change seemed possible. The night that had begun with darkness, fear, and uncertainty ended with action, attention, and a glimmer of hope. The men of Unit 29 had survived not just a dangerous night, but decades of invisibility. And in doing so, they reminded the world, even in the most notorious prisons, even behind walls built to silence, the truth will find a way out. Parchman Farm would never be the same again. If this story shocked you, inspired you, or made you curious about the real-life conditions inside prisons like Parchman, don't forget to subscribe for more documentaries. Smash that like button if you want the world to hear more untold stories, and leave a comment sharing what surprised you the most. Turn on notifications, because stories like this aren't over, and the truth always finds a way to the surface.